All over the world, these huge stone monuments stand with no trace of their creators. They were built with unknown hands for reasons that are still unclear. Here's 15 megalithic structures with no known builders. Starting with number 15, the Baalbek trilithon in Lebanon. In the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon is one of the most puzzling feats of ancient engineering, this massive stone platform at Baalbek, part of what later became known as the Roman Temple of Jupiter. Now, the most striking feature is the so-called trilithon. This is a set of 3 enormous limestone blocks, each estimated to weigh about 800 metric tons. These stones form part of the podium wall beneath the temple and are among the largest building blocks ever used in human construction. Evidence indicates that Baalbek was already a place of worship during the Bronze Age, possibly as early as 3000 BCE. The Romans expanded between the 1st century BCE and the 2nd century CE, building temples to Jupiter, Bacchus, and Venus. Yet the question remains, who constructed the earliest stone platform on which the Romans later built? No records identify the original builders. The enormous lower platform, which includes the trilithon, appears to predate the Roman temple above it. The stones were fitted so tightly using no mortar, they almost have invisible seams. Scholars have suggested that it may have been built by a pre-Roman civilization native to the region, possibly the Phoenicians. However, no inscriptions or layers directly confirm that. What's even weirder are even larger stones that remain in the nearby quarry, unfinished. The most famous of these, known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, measures about 20 meters long and weighs an estimated 1,000 tons. In 2014, German archaeologists discovered an even larger block beneath it, possibly the heaviest stone ever quarried by humans, weighing about 1,650 tons. These discoveries prove that the ancient builders here had extraordinary skill in quarrying and moving massive stones. Modern engineering suggests that wooden rollers, ramps, and lubrication methods like oil or water could have been used to transport the blocks. Yet the terrain around Baalbek makes that a logistical challenge even with those methods. The Romans, though capable engineers, didn't typically work with stone of this size, and no ancient text credits them with moving or placing the trilithon. The purpose of that original platform, whether ceremonial, astronomical, or structural, is still unknown. What is certain, though, is that the precision of the masonry and the size of the stones reflects a high level of engineering from an unidentified culture. Number 14, the Sacsayhuaman Fortress of Peru. Overlooking the city of Cusco in the Peruvian Andes is Sacsayhuaman, an enormous stone fortress built from massive blocks that fit together with amazing precision. The structure is part of the complex system of walls, terraces, and plazas that covers over 4,000 acres. The builders cut and fitted stones, each weighing up to 350 tons, without the use of mortar, creating joints so tight that even a thin blade can't pass between them. Although Sacsayhuaman is generally attributed to the Inca Empire, its full history is partly uncertain. The Incas themselves believed it had been built by an earlier civilization and expanded upon during their reign in the 15th century. Spanish chroniclers recorded that when conquistadors arrived in the 1530s, local people claimed the site predated the Incas by generations. Radiocarbon dating does suggest that earlier construction phases may go back to the Quilque culture around the 11th to 12th century CE, but the precision of the final construction far exceed what is typical for that period. Each stone here was individually shaped to interlock with its neighbors, creating a stable wall that has withstood centuries of earthquakes. The stones are polygonal rather than rectangular. That allows for a complex, self-reinforcing structure. The limestone was quarried several kilometers away and then transported to the hilltop site at an altitude of over 3,700 meters. Without wheels, iron tools, or pack animals capable of hauling these loads, the process would have required immense manpower. The Inca used it as both a fortress and a ceremonial center connected to the city of Cusco, which was laid out in the shape of a puma, with Sacsayhuaman forming the animal's head. Spanish records describe it as a defensive stronghold during the Inca resistance to the conquistadors. No written records exist, as the Inca didn't have a written script and oral histories are fragmentary. While most researchers attribute the main construction to Inca engineers, the question of whether earlier cultures initiated the site's foundation is still wide open. Number 13. The Gunung Padang Terrace Complex in Indonesia. Located in West Java, Indonesia, Gunung Padang is one of Southeast Asia's most intriguing megalithic sites. It sits on top of an extinct volcanic hill about 900 meters above sea level and is composed of 5 step terraces built from massive basalt stones. Though long known to local people, the site drew international attention in the late 20th and early 21st centuries because of its enormous scale. It covers roughly 35 acres, making it the largest known megalithic structure in Indonesia. Archaeologists have dated surface features like terraces and upright stone arrangements to between 500 BCE and 500 CE, which corresponds to the later Neolithic and early Metal Age periods of Indonesian history. The upper layers show evidence of ritual use, possibly for ancestor worship or maybe astronomical observations, and they were constructed with considerable skill in aligning and balancing the heavy stones without mortar. Core drilling and ground-penetrating radar studies conducted between 2011 and 2014 have revealed buried structures and cavities extending dozens of meters beneath the surface, and carbon samples from these lower layers reportedly returned much older dates, some as early as 20,000 BCE. However, the results remain controversial and haven't been universally accepted by the archaeological community. As of now, there's no peer-reviewed evidence confirming large-scale human building activity at Gunung Padang earlier than the first millennium BCE. Nevertheless, the site's layering continues to intrigue researchers. The basalt columns used here formed naturally through volcanic processes, but their arrangement, standing upright or laid horizontally to form retaining walls, was deliberate. Local legends have long associated the site with ancient kingdoms or mythical builders, but no inscriptions, artifacts, or datable cultural materials definitively identify who first constructed it. Yet the absence of clear cultural artifacts also makes it difficult to link it to any known civilization in the region. In short, while these terraces likely date to between 500 BCE and 500 CE, the question of whether deeper structures exist and who might have built them is still open. Number 12. The Ggantija Temples of Malta. On the island of Gozo in the Maltese archipelago are the Ggantija temples. They're among the oldest freestanding stone structures on Earth. They were built approximately between 3600 and 3200 BCE. These megalithic temples predate Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids by centuries. Despite their antiquity, they were constructed with limestone blocks, some weighing over 50 tons, arranged in a sophisticated architectural plan that still survives. Each temple features a series of apses arranged symmetrically along a central axis, connected by a corridor leading to an inner sanctuary. The name Ggantija means place of giants in Maltese, which shows their local folklore, and they attribute the buildings to mythical beings due to their sheer size of their stones. The massive blocks were likely transported short distances using wooden rollers, levers, and possibly spherical stones as bearings. And despite the absence of metal tools, the builders were able to achieve remarkable precision in shaping and positioning the stones. The whole complex is part of what archaeologists call the Maltese temple culture, which did flourish across the islands for more than a millennium before disappearing around 2500 BCE. No written language, identifiable rulers, or clear evidence of external influence has ever been found, and the culture left behind temples, statues, pottery, and burial sites, but no direct indication of their origin. Although the purpose and identity of the builders is uncertain, the temples show a clear continuity with other Maltese sites. Together, these complexes form a unique cultural phenomenon in prehistoric Europe, unmatched in scale or complexity for their time. It was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1980. The people who built it had mastered stone architecture without metal, writing, or the wheel, a feat that remains one of prehistory's greatest accomplishments. Number 11. The Carnac Stones of France. Stretching more than 4 kilometers in Brittany, northwestern France, the Carnac stones form one of the world's largest megalithic complexes. The site includes over 3,000 upright granite stones, some standing as high as 6 meters, arranged in long parallel alignments as well as isolated dolmens. Despite over a century of study, no one knows who erected them, why they were placed in such patterns, or exactly when the work began. Radiocarbon dating of surrounding artifacts suggests the construction started around 4500 to 4000 BCE, possibly earlier during the Neolithic period. This makes Carnac roughly contemporary with or even older than Stonehenge. The builders were likely part of an early agrarian society, but they left no written records, and no identifiable cultural remains link the site conclusively to a specific group. The whole complex consists of several main alignments, the Menek, Camario, and Kerskan, each composed of hundreds of standing stones arranged in rows that gradually increase in height towards the center. Surrounding burial mounds and chamber tombs indicate ritual or ceremonial use, but the purpose of the alignments is still uncertain. Modern archaeological consensus tends towards the idea that Carnac served as a ceremonial landscape connected to burial and ritual activity, but no tools, workshops, or habitation layers directly tied to the erection of the stones have ever been found. Many of these stones weigh between 5 and 40 tons and were quarried several kilometers away. The level of organization to do all this implies a stable and coordinated society that was capable of sustained collective labor, yet the identity of that society is still unknown. However, without direct evidence, like inscriptions or symbolic carvings, the function is still speculative. The builders appear to have had a strong tradition of stone carving and landscape modification that was shared across Western Europe during the late Neolithic. Number 10. The Nabta Playa Stone Circle in Egypt. About 100 kilometers west of Abu Simbel is Nabta Playa. It's one of Africa's earliest known ceremonial sites. Long before the pyramids rose along the Nile, Neolithic pastoralists in this region built a stone circle and a series of megalithic alignments that suggest an early attempt to track celestial events. And although the builders are unknown, this site reveals an unexpectedly sophisticated understanding of astronomy for its time. Discovered in the 1970s by archaeologists Fred Wendorf and Romuald Schild, Nabta Playa dates to roughly 6000 to 5000 BCE, when the area was a seasonal lake that supported small human settlements. Some of the stones align with the sunrise and sunset at the summer solstice, which leads researchers to describe this place as one of the world's earliest astronomical observatories. The people who constructed it were part of a nomadic cattle herding culture that migrated seasonally across the Sahara. Evidence shows that the builders also dug wells and built additional megalithic alignments radiating outward from the circle, maybe marking an important celestial or ritual point on the horizon. The alignments themselves, however, are too deliberate to be accidental. When mapped astronomically, several match the solstice positions of about 6,000 years ago, which does suggest intentional placement based on observation. It predates Stonehenge and the Giza pyramids by millennia, and it shows that people living in what is now one of the driest regions on Earth once had a deep understanding of seasonal change. Some scholars believe it was part of a larger network of ritual sites across prehistoric North Africa, though that remains unproven. But the people who built it eventually disappeared as the Sahara dried up. Their culture faded into the sands. It is one of Africa's most significant monuments, constructed by unknown hands, guided by the movements of the stars. Number 9. The Kalan Stone Rose in the Philippines. In the central Philippines, on the island of Masbate, lies the lesser-known Kalan Stone Rose, a field of upright stones whose origin is largely mysterious. This site has puzzled archaeologists since its discovery in the mid-20th century. Unlike better-known megalithic monuments in Europe or in the Middle East, these formations are relatively modest in height, but they exhibit a deliberate arrangement that points to organized construction. Most of the stones are about a meter tall, although some stand nearly twice that height. The pattern of their placement, particularly the alignment along the consistent north-south and east-west orientation, does suggest a deliberate design rather than a random deposition. Surveys conducted in the 1950s and 60s linked the stone rose to a surrounding complex, which was a prehistoric culture identified through pottery and burial artifacts found nearby. These patterns, primarily earthenware vessels that were decorated with geometric patterns, date between 1500 and 500 BCE. However, no direct connection between the pottery and the stone rose has been established. The lack of inscriptions, carvings, or associated habitation layers does limit its interpretation. The stone's relatively small size compared to megaliths elsewhere implies that they were erected by a small, locally organized community, rather than a centralized political structure. This has all led to speculation that Kalan represents a local adaptation of a wider tradition, though concrete evidence for this cultural transmission is lacking. Whether the stone rose played a role in those rituals remains unproven, but their deliberate construction indicates symbolic or communal purpose. Today, they remain largely unstudied due to limited funding. Erosion and vegetation have obscured much of the site, and a few modern surveys have been conducted. But until detailed excavations and modern dating techniques are applied, its age and meaning will remain uncertain. Number 8. The Yonaguni Monument, Japan. Off the southern coast of Yonaguni Island in Japan's archipelago lies a massive underwater rock formation that stirred decades of debate. It's known as the Yonaguni Monument. This consists of broad terraces, right-angled steps, and vertical walls carved into a sandstone bed beneath about 25 meters of water. It was first discovered in 1986 by a local diver, and subsequent surveys have revealed a complex structure about 150 meters long and up to 25 meters high. It's got sharp angles and flat surfaces that appear, at first glance, to be intentionally shaped. Prominent features include a massive step platform that resembles a ziggurat, which is a large triangular plane, and what some divers refer to as staircases and corridors. Most mainstream researchers interpret this monument as a natural formation that was shaped by seismic uplift and ocean currents. However, several features complicate that interpretation. Some surfaces appear unusually flat, and certain corners meet at near-perfect right angles. Additionally, they're isolated upright stones and what appear to be pathways that seem too regular to be purely natural. Marine archaeologists of the University of the Ryukyus has argued that portions of the site do show signs of human modification, possibly dating back to the last ice age, when sea levels were significantly lower and when the area was dry land. He proposed that it may have been part of a prehistoric settlement, but his claims remain controversial and it's not been substantiated by any peer-reviewed evidence. To date, no artifacts, carvings, or cultural remains have been found in association with this structure, which makes it impossible to confirm any human involvement. Radiocarbon dating of the nearby coral suggests that the area was submerged around 10,000 years ago, but this only provides a rough geological time frame. Most archaeologists consider the evidence insufficient as a man-made site. While some popular accounts have exaggerated its mystery, the cautious consensus among scientists is that Yonaguni is a natural formation that may have been slightly altered or used by humans in prehistory. Until direct archaeological evidence emerges, the builders of Yonaguni, if there ever were any, are going to remain unknown. Moving on to number 7, the dolmens of North Caucasus in Russia. Scattered all around the foothills of Russia's western Caucasus Mountains, thousands of ancient stone dolmens form one of Europe's most extensive and least understood megalithic traditions. These dolmens date roughly between 3000 to 1000 BCE, and they're remarkable for their uniform design. The builders remain unidentified as no written records, inscriptions, or directly associated settlements have ever been discovered. Each dolmen consists of a massive stone slab, 4 walls, a roof, and a floor that are precisely fitted together to form a small chamber. The front stone usually features a circular opening, often centered and smoothed around the edges, and the openings were sealed with stone plugs. Some of them contained burial remains or artifacts like pottery, beads, and bronze tools. These findings suggest that at least some of them served as tombs or ritual enclosures. The slabs are cut from local sandstone, granite, or limestone. They're shaped to fit tightly without mortar, and they're leveled with an accuracy that's pretty difficult to achieve even with modern tools. Some blocks weigh up to 20 tons and were transported from quarries several kilometers away. Archaeologists categorize these dolmens into several types: trapezoidal, rectangular, round, and the so-called composite designs, indicating that regional or chronological variations exist. Despite the differences, though, the circular portal remains a consistent feature, and that hints at a shared symbolic meaning. Some researchers have proposed that the openings may have represented passageways between the worlds of the living and the dead. Excavations have uncovered small amounts of cultural materials like ceramics, bronze ornaments, and tools. The region has always been a crossroads between Europe and Asia, and the dolmens may have been the product of multiple interacting societies over time, rather than a single culture. Local legend attributes the dolmens to giants or ancient heroes, which echoes familiar folklore across these megalithic sites in the world. However, scientific consensus holds that they were built by local prehistoric peoples whose descendants may have later emerged with or been displaced by other Bronze Age populations. Number 6. The trilithons of Atlit Yam, Israel. Off the Mediterranean coast of Israel, beneath meters of water, is the submerged Neolithic village of Atlit Yam, one of the best preserved prehistoric underwater settlements. It's dated to around 6900 to 6300 BCE. It includes homes, hearths, human burials, and a circle of massive standing stones, or trilithons, that appear to have been arranged deliberately. These megaliths are among the oldest known stone alignments anywhere, yet the builders and the full purpose still remain unknown. Atlit Yam was discovered in the 1980s during underwater surveys near the modern town of Atlit, south of Haifa. The village was eventually submerged as a result of rising sea levels following the end of the last ice age, which did preserve it beneath the layers of sand. There's a semicircle of 7 megaliths, each weighing up to 600 kilograms, that's positioned around a central freshwater spring. The stones were arranged vertically in pairs, which formed a partial enclosure. Some stones have carved grooves or cup-like depressions, suggesting that they may have been used in ritual or water-related ceremonies. Excavations revealed well-built stone houses, grinding stones, and animal bones, indicating a stable agricultural society. Yet, despite all the rich material culture, no evidence explains why the people built the ring or how they transported the stones from their original sources. The uniformity of the stones does suggest communal labor and planning beyond simple utilitarian construction. Isotope and DNA analysis of skeletons found at the site reveal a population that practiced mixed subsistence. That means farming grains and legumes while continuing to fish and hunt marine animals. Their tools were made from flint and bone, which is typical of that period, and show no sign of metalworking. The erection of these megaliths at such an early stage of development shows that symbolic architecture existed long before the emergence of complex urban societies. However, the exact purpose of these circles remains unknown. It may have served as a communal meeting place, a ritual space related to the freshwater spring, or just an early form of astronomical marker. Number 5. The Menhirs of Aveyron, France. In southern France's Aveyron department, thousands of upright stones known as menhirs dot the countryside, forming one of Europe's largest and oldest concentrations of standing stones. Some reach over 6 meters tall. They were erected roughly between 4500 and 2500 BCE by an unidentified Neolithic culture that left no written records. These stones are scattered across open fields and forested ridges. Many stand alone, but others are arranged in clusters or short alignments, often near ancient burial mounds or dolmens. Archaeologists have cataloged over 1,200 of these stones in Aveyron alone, carved from local limestone and granite. And some features engraved like decorations, abstract patterns, anthropomorphic outlines, or even weapons like daggers and axes suggest that they served as symbolic and commemorative purpose. The presence of similar monuments across Brittany, Corsica, and the Iberian Peninsula indicate that the Aveyron builders were part of a wider tradition that spanned the Atlantic Europe, but the cultural identity of the group responsible hasn't been established. The engraved motifs do offer some insight. Anthropomorphic menhirs, stone-carved faces with torsos or stylized clothing, appear to represent deified ancestors or tribal leaders. However, without inscriptions or associated texts, interpretation is speculative. The precise function of these monuments, whether funerary, territorial, or ceremonial, has yet to be definitively determined. The effort required to move and erect each block, sometimes weighing more than 10 tons, shows a communal labor and a social organization, yet no clear evidence of permanent settlements on the same scale has been found nearby, which just adds to the mystery of who the builders were and how they lived. By the Iron Age, most were abandoned, their original meanings forgotten. Medieval legends later reinterpreted them as pagan stones or remnants of giants, which does echo the region's memory of an anonymous past. Number 4. The Plain of Jars in Laos. In the hills of northern Laos, thousands of massive stone vessels known as the Plain of Jars lie scattered across more than 90 archaeological sites. Each jar, carved from solid sandstone, granite, or limestone, weighs between 1 to 6 tons, with the largest example reaching heights of about 3 meters. Despite decades of research, archaeologists still don't know who created these artifacts, why they were made, or precisely when the culture responsible flourished. The most famous cluster, known as Site 1 near Punsavan, contains over 300 jars arranged across grassy plateaus and gentle slopes. Many more sites, some with fewer than a dozen jars, others with hundreds, are spread around the plateau. The jars are roughly cylindrical, with thick walls and hollow interiors, and they're often accompanied by large stone discs interpreted as lids or grave markers. Excavations in the 1930s were the first systematic studies on the site. Kalan, an archaeologist, concluded that the jars were associated with funerary practices, possibly used to expose or store human remains before secondary burial. Radiocarbon dating places some burials between 500 BCE and 500 CE, though the jars themselves may be older. No evidence reveals the identity of the culture that built them. No writing, tools, or associated settlements have been definitively linked. The jar's makers clearly possessed advanced quarrying and stone carving skills, as some stones were transported from quarries located several kilometers away, which was pretty impressive given the region's steep terrain. The whole plain of jars does present additional challenges for archaeologists. Much of the area remains contaminated with unexploded ordnance from 20th century conflicts, restricting the access and limiting an excavation. As a result, many sites remain unstudied, and the full extent of the complex is likely larger than currently known. Each jar is an example of the vanished culture that shaped stone with purpose and precision and then disappeared without a trace, leaving only their colossal vessels scattered across the Laotian hills. Number 3. The Namorotunga stone circles in Kenya. In northwestern Kenya, near to the western shore of Lake Turkana, is a group of ancient stone circles known as Namorotunga, a name meaning the people of stone in the local language. These sites consist of dozens of upright basalt pillars arranged in patterns that have puzzled people since their discovery in the 1970s. The largest site, Namorotunga 2, features 19 basalt pillars surrounded by smaller ones, all carefully positioned on a rocky plain. The stones were first documented in detail in 1973. Early studies to this area and the nearby burial mounds contain decorated pottery, beads, and iron artifacts. Radiocarbon dating of associated materials placed these finds between 300 BCE and 300 CE, suggesting that the site did belong to a pastoralist community that predated the region's known historic tribes. Each one is made of columnar basalt, but clearly selected and set upright with human hands. The arrangement appears deliberate, aligned roughly along the north-south and east-west axes, with some pillars tilted in ways that do suggest purposeful placement. In 1978, Mark Lynch proposed that the pillars aligned with the rising positions of certain stars from the constellation Triangulum around 300 BCE, which potentially marked a lunar calendar system similar to that used by modern Cushitic peoples of East Africa. Today, most archaeologists accept that the astronomical interpretation remains unproven, though the precision of the alignments does continue to intrigue researchers. Excavations at nearby Namorotunga 1 and other smaller sites revealed tumuli, stone-covered graves containing human remains, suggesting that at least some of the circles were associated with burial or ancestor veneration. Still, though, the complexity of the layouts here to transport and erect all these heavy stones imply a degree of social organization and a shared belief among the builders. The people who raised the stones lived in a pivotal time, transitioning from mobile herding to semi-settled life, adopting iron tools and engaging in long-distance trade networks. Yet they left no writing, and their language, rituals, and self-identity have vanished. The pillars do stand weathered, but intact. They're markers of a prehistoric culture whose ingenuity remains hidden beneath the dust of the Turkana Plains. Number 2. The Goseck Circle in Germany. In fields near the town of Goseck in Saxony-Anhalt, Germany, lies a circular earthwork that may represent Europe's oldest known solar observatory. It's known as the Goseck Circle. Dates to around 4900 BCE, nearly 2 millennia before Stonehenge. Though the culture itself is archaeologically well documented, the specific individuals or communities responsible for designing and constructing it remain anonymous. The Goseck site was discovered from aerial photographs in the 1990s, which revealed concentric circular ditches and palisade rings that span about 75 meters in diameter. When alignments were analyzed, the archaeologists found that 2 gates correspond exactly to the points on the horizon where the sun rises and sets during the winter solstice. The 3rd gate, oriented due north, may have served as a reference for alignment or ritual orientation. These observations have led researchers to conclude that the Goseck Circle did function as a solar calendar, allowing its builders to track the solar year and mark seasonal events that were crucial for agriculture. The ability to determine the solstices would have helped these farmers regulate planting, harvesting, and ritual cycles associated with fertility and renewal. Some signs of controlled burning and scattered human remains suggest that the ceremonies and possibly sacrifices may have taken place there. The exact process of its construction, though, is still being studied. The layout's symmetry and alignment did require considerable planning and coordination, which were impressive achievements for an early farming community. Goseck is one of several similar circular enclosures found across Central Europe, collectively referred to as rondelles. These structures appear to have been part of a shared Neolithic tradition, but their cultural meaning likely varied from site to site. The linear pottery people left behind tools and evidence of domestic life across much of the region, but nothing in their artifacts directly explains the construction of these kinds of monumental observatories. Its builders, anonymous farmers of early Europe, left no names or stories. Their circle, built from wood and earth nearly 7,000 years ago, continues to mark the path of the sun each winter, just as it did for its unknown ancestors. Number 1. The Pohnpei Nan Madol ruins in Micronesia. Off the eastern shore of Pohnpei, a lush volcanic island in the Federated States of Micronesia, is one of the Pacific's most impressive archaeological sites, Nan Madol. It's often called the Venice of the Pacific. This ruined city consists of nearly 100 artificial islets built on top of a lagoon, connected by tidal canals, and walled with enormous basalt columns. Despite the scale, the identity of the builders and the exact means by which they constructed it is uncertain. Nan Madol covers about 200 acres and includes stone platforms, temples, tombs, and residences. The largest structures are composed of basalt columns, some weighing up to 50 tons, carefully stacked in a log cabin style to form walls as high as 8 meters. Studies indicate that the city was used as a ceremonial and political center by the Sotolir dynasty, which ruled Pohnpei between approximately 1200 and 1600 CE. Yet local oral traditions and evidence suggest that the earliest foundations beneath Nan Madol may predate this dynasty by centuries, possibly as early as 500 CE. The columns were quarried from volcanic flows on Pohnpei, but the quarry sites are several kilometers inland and uphill from the coast. Transporting stones, each weighing several tons, through dense jungle and across tidal flats would have required extraordinary organization. Archaeologists believe that the stones were likely rafted around the island using canoes and bamboo floats, though this does remain a hypothesis rather than a proven fact. Traditional Pohnpeian legends attribute the construction to twin sorcerers named Olisipa and Olishopa, who supposedly used supernatural powers to move the stones. Early European explorers in the 19th century, likewise astonished by the ruins, compared them to the megalithic structures of Egypt and the Near East, though the materials and context are wholly Pacific. Excavations have revealed evidence of habitation here, pottery shards, tools, and shell ornaments, but the lack of writing leaves the timeline uncertain. The Sotolir period is well documented through oral history, but the origins of the earliest construction phases are still unclear. Some researchers propose that Nan Madol evolved gradually from smaller coastal ritual platforms built by Pohnpeian ancestors, who then later expanded the complex into a royal capital. Rising sea levels and silting likely disrupted its canal system, and by the time European ships reached the island in the early 1800s, Nan Madol had long been abandoned, with the basalt walls, however, remaining intact.